Why was there a failure to act sooner on the moratorium deadline? Was it because the administration and congressional Democratic leadership were too focused on other legislation, on bipartisan infrastructure stuff, instead of prioritizing the rent and moratorium issue?
I think that's part of it, Mehdi, and of course it's always good to be on the show. You know, I signed a letter along with Ayanna Pressley and others back in January of this year, urging the White House to extend the moratorium. So no one can reasonably think it's not on their radar. And to the extent it was not on their radar, because they chose not to put it on their radar. And so in that respect, there is ample blame to go around. But let's be very clear about something that the Supreme Court did. It allowed the last extension of the eviction moratorium to proceed. There has never been a binding ruling from the Supreme Court saying that were the CDC to extend the eviction moratorium again, that it would be struck down by that same court. And so it is incumbent upon the White House to do what it can, in this case, instruct the CDC to extend the eviction moratorium yet again, if for nothing else than for the purpose of providing short-term relief, even if the Supreme Court were to issue a different ruling the next time it goes up to them. That possibly could be enough time to allow for the disbursement of the over $40 billion that Congress, including people like myself, authorized, appropriated earlier this year through the American Rescue Plan.
Congressman, I'm glad you mentioned the Supreme Court. I'm going to come back to the court in a moment. But we just heard Representatives Ro Khanna and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from your party say there are Democrats in your party, in the House, who didn't support extending the moratorium. Do you have any indication why some in your party aren't on board? Is it just special interest money? Is it ideology? And shouldn't you name them? Shouldn't people in your party name these colleagues? Shouldn't they be named and, I would argue, shamed?
I'm one of the folks who encouraged the Speaker to hold a floor vote on this because I think people would be hard-pressed to explain to their constituents why they did not act when given the opportunity to prevent as many as 11 million people from becoming homeless. This is deeply personal for me as someone who has faced housing insecurity himself. I grew up in Section 8 housing, and by the grace of God was able to make it to the United States Congress later in life. But there are so many folks who are not so lucky, folks who Congress understood to need rental assistance, which is the reason we appropriated tens of billions of dollars for that very purpose. It's why I'm so frustrated with this narrative that landlords are not going to be made whole. Now, of course, some states have been terrible in terms of delaying the process by which funds are dispersed. New York State being one of them, frankly, and it's why I've signed on to a New York congressional delegation letter to Governor Cuomo for the purpose of encouraging him to speed up that process. But it just is the case that in the midst of a public health crisis, if the humanity of other people is not enough to persuade you, we cannot afford, as the Delta variant continues to ravage the same communities who disproportionately are bearing the brunt of this eviction crisis, of this housing crisis, to allow people to be on the streets in this environment. I mean, my goodness, we are struggling right now. And yes, House Democrats, I think, are not being told to do this by their districts. We know that a number of moderate members, in fact, are co-sponsors of Maxine Waters' legislation. You know, my colleague Cindy Axne is a co-sponsor of Maxine Waters' legislation. And think about what kind of consequences there might be at the ballot box. There none, I would submit to you. I mean, what is the ad going to look like? So the Congress member cared so much about the constituents that they prevented them from becoming homeless? I mean, that's just not the kind of thing that would resonate negatively with the electorate. So this is more about, I think, misinformation.
But Congressman, as you pointed out, there wasn't a floor vote. It was done by unanimous consent. A Republican was able to say no, and everyone moved on with their life. I mean, the leadership of your party didn't put those anonymous moderates who oppose this legislation on the spot, sadly. Just returning to the issue of authority, the White House and lawmakers such as yourself, as we've discussed, are at odds over whether the president and the CDC do have the authority to continue an eviction moratorium. Here's what White House advisor and American Rescue Plan coordinator Gene Sperling said about that today. Have a listen.
Given the rising urgency of the spread of the Delta variant, the president has asked all of us, including the CDC, to do everything in our power to look for every potential legal authority we can have to prevent evictions. To date, the CDC director and her team have been unable to find legal authority even for a more targeted eviction moratorium that would focus just on counties with higher rates of COVID spread.
Congressman, you a moment ago very bluntly pointed out that the Supreme Court has never ruled against it. Even in June, it was 5-4 with Kavanaugh as the swing vote. Here you have the White House saying, nope, the CDC's, look, they can't find any legal authority.
Yeah, that's nonsense. And Jeff Stein wrote on Twitter earlier today that even before Sunday, which is what I think today the White House is saying is the time at which it asked the CDC if it could extend the moratorium and was told no by the CDC attorneys, they had already said that there was no authority. And so clearly they are trying to arrive at a result that they had already determined prior to I mean, they just don't want to do this is the problem. And that speaks to a broader issue. The same people who are going to be bearing the brunt of this eviction crisis are the same people whose fundamental right to vote is being stripped away. And so there is a moment of reckoning, I think, coming with respect to this White House. There are communities that delivered the presidency to Joe Biden and that delivered majorities to Congress who are not being well represented right now, I dare say. And it pains me to say that because there are so many things I do agree with on a policy level that this administration has been doing. But when it comes to helping the least of these, as the Bible says, the administration has fallen far short of where it ought to be.
Yeah, I remember Joe Biden saying, I will always have your back to black voters, and as you say, disproportionately affected by both COVID and evictions. You've tweeted that the possibility of the Supreme Court striking down a CDC extension of the eviction moratorium is a good argument, a great argument, you say, to expand the court. But isn't that part of the problem, that this administration is not just not interested in, using the powers it has, it certainly is not interested in reforming the Supreme Court, as you and I would like to see done?
It's not even interested in getting rid of the filibuster. And so you punt this responsibility to Congress, knowing that there are not going to be 10 Republican senators to support an extension of the eviction moratorium. And then you throw your hands up when people ask you to at least put public pressure on Manchin and Sinema to get rid of that Jim Crow relic that would allow a legislative process to proceed. Senator Manchin says that he supports extending the eviction moratorium. When does that happen? But we need the White House yet again to rise to the occasion and to be the master of the Senate in the way that Lyndon B. Johnson was.
Yes, we do. Very well put. One last quick question. You mentioned the money that's out there. One of the most lazy and pernicious right-wing arguments is we can't afford to help people. We can't afford to spend this money. As you pointed out, $46 billion has already been, put out there by the American Rescue Plan for rental assistance. It's already there. And yet it hasn't been distributed. Some states have handed out less than 10% of their first allocations, according to an NBC News analysis. That's outrageous, isn't it?
It is outrageous. And I understand, though I'm so saddened by the behavior of Republican governors. I did not expect this to be a situation in blue states. And so it speaks to the fact that the next time we do legislatively extend the moratorium, which I hope will happen sooner than later, we got to make sure that we make it easier for landlords to be made whole, to get the money that Congress has already appropriated, understanding that they need their resources as well.